All right, this is the pitch deck for presupplied.com, and we are working on early childhood education, so building better schools, and one of our first goals is to teach 3-year-olds how to read. My name is Serge Torka, and I've bootstrapped multiple software companies with moderate levels of success, so we're in the single-digit millions in recurring revenue, and I did this pretty much on hard mode, so I've made every mistake possible. I refused to get investors because I just wanted to prove to myself that I could build a business with no outside help. And now I'm at a point where I think I've developed my skills enough that I could really take it up to the next level. My background is in technology, so I'm a graduate from University of Waterloo in Canada with computer science, and all of my life I've been doing technology from a very young age. From like age 7 or so, my dad started teaching me how to program, and I've done it all my life. And I also have a very deep passion for teaching. I've been surrounded by teachers all my life. Both of my parents are teachers. 2 of my grandparents were teachers. And, my dad is one of the best teachers I've ever met. And so I just really learned a lot through osmosis just by being constantly surrounded by teachers. So what problem are we solving here? Well, 52% of US adults' reading level is rated at grade 7 or below. So just personally, I have a young son who I'm starting to look for schools for, and it's just been very difficult to find a great public school that I really approve of. And if we look at the blue chart here, it shows the distribution of literacy across US adults, and you see that the first 3 columns there, 4%, 14%, and 34%, those are the columns representing a literacy level of grade 7 or below, and you can see that's 52%. So a huge portion of the US adult population is, semi-literate. And the reason this is such a big deal is there's a huge correlation between the level of literacy and lifetime income. We can just dramatically increase the total GDP in the US. So if you multiply these numbers out by this distribution, you get roughly $2.5 trillion in missed GDP. So that's like 10% of the GDP. And that translates almost directly to $500 billion in missed tax revenue per year. So this is just an enormous amount of lost opportunity for the United States. Now let's talk about the competitors to early childhood education. So what is currently being done? First of all, we have private schools. So there are a few great schools available, but I have a moral stance against sending my kids to private school because they're only available to rich people. So, if you're in the top few percent in the population, you can send your kid to private school and have a great education. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed. We really want something where even very poor kids can have access to a great education. Public schools, we already spoke about, so just really poor performance overall. There are charter schools in the United States. So I'm actually in Canada, so they don't have charter schools, but in the United States, they have charter schools, and the performance does seem to be slightly better than the public schools, but not, so there aren't any schools that I found that are just like exceptional and available to poor people. And finally, we have Khan Academy. This is actually, I think, the strongest competitor. So this is just an amazing resource. It is free, it's available to everybody, but they don't provide the classroom. So they build a curriculum, but it requires heavy parental involvement. So you need to sit with your child and work on these lessons. And the lessons are not that entertaining. So they've tried to gamify some of them, but they're not particularly entertaining to watch. And so kids do not watch them just for fun. So our solution looks like a system of charter schools where the curriculum is extremely personalized down to the individual. So it's a digital curriculum where it replaces everything that teachers do today in terms of lecturing and marking, and it frees up roughly 6 hours a day to do one-on-ones with students and parents. And so now the teachers, because they're spending most of the day doing one-on-ones with students, they can teach at the optimal level for each student. No student can fall behind because the teacher can always teach exactly where they are. Another thing that we're changing about the classroom is that instead of rotating to a new teacher every year, you stick with the same teacher for your entire elementary school education. And by the time you're in grade 3 or 4, when behavioral issues really start becoming a problem, that teacher is now a trusted role model in the student's life. And the reason for them not to misbehave is not because they'll get in trouble, it's because they're afraid of disappointing someone that they trust. And so we really think that that'll help mitigate a lot of the behavioral problems that schools have today. Then we're going to pay teachers more. So we want to be able to recruit very competitive teachers where if they're choosing between working in industry and working as a teacher, they don't have to take a 3x pay cut. And we're going to do this by dedicating almost all the money that goes to the school to the teacher. So we just want to pay the teacher as much as possible. And finally, we're going to aim to start school at a very young age. So our target here is 2 years old, because the younger that we can get to kids, especially when they have broken families at home, the more of an impact our great role model teacher can have on those kids. So what does wild success look like? Well, we'd like to run 1% of all elementary schools across the United States. So that's about 1,000 elementary schools, or around 20 schools per state. And of the remaining 99%, we think we can convert half of them to actually use our model. So if we can prove a classroom model that delivers way better results, we think we can do a good job convincing existing public schools to switch. At least 95% of our graduates from grade 8 should have a grade 8 or above literacy level. So that is basically everybody is fully literate. And if we've achieved all these, we think we'll have a measurable impact on US GDP and on tax revenue collected by the United States. So now let's jump into the demo. So I actually taught my 2-year-old son how to read using this curriculum, and I was very careful to make sure that the total one-on-one time that he got for reading per day was less than 30 minutes. So that's roughly what the students in our classrooms would get. And so you can just see for yourself. I'll give a few snippets of our curriculum and of him reading.
Soon there was a mountain of ice cream in the bowl.
Huh?
Bowl.
Huh?
Bowl.
Do it one letter at a time.
Bowl.
Bowl. Very good.
Orange.
That's his name. What's his name?
George.
George. That's a tricky one, yeah?
Not gorge.
Not Gorge. George. George?
Was just about to put Valinda. Valinda.
Huh? Try it one letter at a time. Try one letter.
Vanilla.
Vanilla. Very good.
Press E. Press R. Press D. Press F. Good job. Good job. Good job. Good job.
So in my opinion, this is a huge blue ocean. There is a lot of opportunity that hasn't been realized. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of red tape to open a school. There are a lot of problems that in the very short term deliver more financial results. And so most entrepreneurs don't try. This is the same opportunity that Stripe exploited in the payment processor space, where the effort to build a system that integrates with all kinds of payment systems was so high that very few entrepreneurs tried it. So to give you an idea of how few people are actually competing in this direction, last year in New York State, there were just 5 applications to open charter schools. And most of those 5, I couldn't get exact numbers from the lady on the phone, but most of those 5, so 3 or more, were rejected for clerical errors. So like deadlines being missed or the forms not being filled out correctly. So it's just complete open space. So why is this possible now and not before? Well, in the last 8 months, we've had incredible jumps in performance in large language models. And that's what basically enables us to build this entire curriculum to be digitized. So we want to get rid of all of the marking that a teacher has to do. And in order to do that, we basically have an LLM that's evaluating the student. So let's talk a little bit about how we make money. And this is actually tricky because we want to make sure that great education for everybody is a byproduct of our company. So we don't want to charge for the education itself. And so part 1 is the school buildings themselves. Now, this is the small scale idea, but in poor neighborhoods, you can buy great buildings for very cheap just because the community is poor and lots of delinquencies on rent and things like that. The cost of labor is low, so actually renovating that building to make it into an exceptional school is really cheap. And the way it works is that the charter school is a nonprofit and the tuition for students is paid for by the state. And then the charter school will sign long-term leases with the for-profit company to lease the school building from them. And essentially there is an arbitrage opportunity where the charter school is an amazing tenant because they have all of their revenue backed by government tuition payments, whereas the average building in the neighborhood has a high vacancy and delinquency rate. And so the rents have to adjust accordingly, and so we can charge the same amount of rents, but we won't have that vacancy or delinquency. So that ends up just giving you these crazy high cap rates of like on the order of 30%, which is just almost unheard of. And roughly each school generates about $1 million in rent. And so if we get to our wild success where we have 1,000 schools, that means we're making $1 billion in rent on the school buildings per year. Now, the problem with this is that each individual school has a lot of red tape to go with it. And so ideally, we'd like to make more per school if possible, because building 1,000 schools and going through all that red tape, that's a lot of work. And so that's part 2. And this is what I call the neighborhood flip. So the idea is the same as doing house flipping. So you go into an ugly house and you do the floors, you paint the walls nice, you make it look more modern, buy new appliances, and then you sell it for more than the amount that you put in. And the idea is the exact same, except we're going to go into poor neighborhoods and flip the entire neighborhood. So there are poor neighborhoods in the United States where the average house price is a third of the national average. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go in and buy 10% of the houses in that neighborhood and we're going to specifically look for neighborhoods where the schools suck. So, they have 1 out of 10 schools, and we're going to buy a bunch of houses. Then we're going to build a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 school. And our expectation is that if we do this, essentially middle-class people that are looking for great schools will be willing to take some amount of risk with the poor quality of neighborhood in exchange for having a great school. And so we're essentially forcing the appreciation of the property in that neighborhood in the fastest way possible. So we expect within about 5 years, we should get that neighborhood's house prices to at least the national average. And so that's roughly 3x in 5 years, which after overhead annualizes to about 20%. So this is just a great return, not to mention that the houses themselves have a negative carry cost. So while you're holding them for those 5 years, you can actually rent them out and they cash flow, because in poor neighborhoods, it's typically quite easy to find cash flowing properties. And so the ones that you buy are going to be cash flowing, so they pay you to hold them. All right, so now let's talk about what we need money for immediately. So for the next year, we need to prove that the curriculum works for an entire class of 20 kids. So I've proved it on my son, but maybe my son is special. Maybe I'm cheating, so maybe I'm spending a lot more time with him or paying for private tutors or whatever. I'm not, but maybe that's the case. And so we want to prove that the model works for a class of 20 kids. So our goal is to build out an entire curriculum for a grade level. So we're looking at age 3. So we want to build everything out for a group of kids for age 3. And we need to buy and renovate a school building. And we need to cover the tuition payments for a class of 3-year-olds. And there aren't yet any states that offer public schooling for 3-year-olds. So they're too young. And we'll talk about that in a second. And so how much do we need? So we need roughly $1 million to build the curriculum. So this will cover some engineers, a designer, and a teaching expert. So somebody who's spent a lot more time teaching kids than I have. I've taught maybe a couple hundred kids, but if we can find somebody that's spent, their entire life working with kids, I think they just do a better job designing the curriculum. Then we need $500,000 for a content manager, an editor, and various actors to actually build the video lectures. Anything that is missing from Khan Academy, we want to build it ourselves, and specifically we want them to be entertaining videos that kids will watch voluntarily for fun. So they shouldn't be boring or something that you're forced to watch. Then we need $500,000 for the building and $500,000 to renovate. And then we need $300,000 for the tuition payment. So that's what it costs to run one class of 20 kids. And that is the same amount that a government would pay us. So we are budgeting the classroom based on what we actually expect in revenue. And that $300K covers the teacher, any helpers for the class, the rent for the building, and any equipment that they need. And then we have $200,000 in overhead and error. So just in case we, underestimated some of these prices, we want to make sure that we budget for that. And so what is our goal for 1 year from now? So we want to teach a single class of 23-year-olds how to read. And the reason we picked that, even though the 3-year-olds are not covered by government tuition, is because the story is just too good. It's a really good underdog story, especially if it's done in a really poor community. The story is so good that I think it'll go viral if we succeed. And if we go viral, that'll enable a bunch of things. It'll enable us to raise the next round, so enough money to build the entire curriculum rather than just 1 year, and to do our first neighborhood flip. It'll also allow us to negotiate with governments to cover tuition at an earlier age. It'll be very easy to demonstrate that you actually collect more taxes by teaching kids at a younger age. Finally, if we are very well known and build a reputation very quickly, then I think the payback period on the neighborhood flip actually decreases, because we can basically buy 10% of the neighborhood, then announce that we are building the school, and then other entrepreneurs will come in and buy the houses for us. And so that speeds up the time until we fix the neighborhood. All right, so that's it. And actually, there is one more commitment that I want to make. 0% of people in my position would risk moving their family to a poor neighborhood. And I'm willing to do that. All right, so that's it for our pitch deck for presupplied.com. This is the same opportunity that Stripe exploited in the payment processor space. In the payment processor space,